In May of 2023, I hiked the West Coast Trail with one of my best friends, Joel. Both of us had ample experience with coastal backpacking, but primarily along the Olympic coast in Washington state. This backpacking trip had been on my bucket list since I was in high school. A once-in-a-lifetime, pie-in-the-sky sort of trip that was both daunting and mysterious. Over 75 kilometers, or 47 miles, of rugged coastline and overland trails along the south side of Vancouver Island awaited us. Known as the Graveyard of the Pacific, this jagged coastline was also home to many shipwrecks. The trail was originally made as a lifeline for sailors who were unfortunate victims of losing their vessel. In this video, I'll share my personal experience of hiking the trail, what things were like day to day, the most enjoyable and challenging moments, and also how my expectations going into this trip were completely subverted. Now don't get me wrong, this was an amazing trip from top to bottom, but nothing in my decades of backpacking experience prepared me for what awaited along the West Coast Trail. Joel and I gathered our things and left Seattle, driving north to Canada and the ferries at Tsawwassen. Our plan for the first 2 days was to set up our hike in such a way that we'd be hiking to our car at the destination. On day 1, we took the ferry from Tsawwassen to Swartz Bay on Vancouver Island and drove to Lake Cowichan to spend the night. It was a nice day, and the ferry ride in particular was enjoyable, but otherwise this day was mostly spent in the car. For day 2, we started the day in Lake Cowichan and took some logging roads to Bamfield, where we had lunch and hung out for a bit before heading to the destination for our hike, Pachena Bay. There, we relaxed on the beach and prepped our backpacks, as this is where we'd be leaving my car over the next week. In the early afternoon, we took the West Coast Trail Express south, from Pachena Bay to Port Renfrew, as our plan was to hike the trail starting from the south end and heading north. In general, this is seen as getting the tough terrain out of the way early and leaving some of the easier terrain towards the end. The ride in the shuttle took about 4 hours and was bumpy and dusty the whole time. The only other passengers were a father and son from Edmonton who were also starting the trail the next day, but were planning on hiking the entirety in 5 days instead of 7 days like Joel and I. They were friendly, and they actually ended up being our neighbors once we got to our lodgings in Port Renfrew. Since they'd done their orientation already on the north end of the trail, they started the next day early, and we didn't cross paths with them again. Our other neighbor was actually someone who we would end up running into hiking the opposite direction on the trail, but further ahead, on day 3. In Port Renfrew, we had a small hiker hut with the basic necessities, just a place to spend the night before starting the trail. We had a nice dinner down by the water and looked out across Port San Juan to the forested hills rising up from the water. Over those miles of terrain was our first leg of the West Coast Trail, what some consider to be the most difficult portion of the hike. We turned in and slept, but not without Joel worrying that I'd careen off the top bunk and fall onto him during the night. We woke up bright and early in our Port Renfrew hiker hut and went through our final preparations before the trip. Everything from here either needed to go into the garbage or go into our packs for the entirety of the trail. We crossed the street to a small cafe and got some coffee. We also picked up some massive Cubano sandwiches to have later for lunch. Once we were caffeinated up, we left our hut and trundled down the road to the stop for the West Coast Trail Express. There, we waited for the shuttle for the short ride from Port Renfrew to the trailhead at Gordon River. Once the shuttle arrived, that's when we met Veronica. Veronica, or Vroni, was from Munich, Germany, and on an international tour around the world to spend time in nature and hike while on leave from work. She'd been to New Zealand and the US and was spending some time in Canada to explore the sites before moving on to the Bahamas. Long story short, we ended up hiking the entirety of the West Coast Trail with her, as her planned itinerary lined up with ours, and she was looking for a group to join so she wouldn't have to hike the trail alone. To be fair, she was also looking for a group since she was worried about the potential dangers of running into wolves or bears. But Joel and I were happy to travel with another person, and the unexpected addition really changed the entire adventure for the better. Us three all got along well, and over the next 7 days, Vroni went from being a total stranger to a good friend. At the Gordon River Trailhead, we met a handful of other hikers at the ranger station where we had our pre-hike orientation. A ranger went over the do's and don'ts of the hike, the permits, the traditions and culture behind the hike, and gave us each a map and a tide table. After paying our fees, all of us boarded a small boat and crossed Gordon River to the trailhead. On board were Joel, Vroni, and myself, a group of 3 hikers from Calgary who we'd make friends with over the next week, named Anne, Colin, and Andrew, 2 friends from Vancouver named Will and John, who we'd meet up with on day 6, and a couple who were hiking the trail for the 3rd time and wouldn't cross paths with us again since they sped right out of the gate. I mention this all because by the end of the hike, it was apparent this was almost like a cohort for us. We were a group of folks hiking this long trail in the same direction over the next week, and we'd be crossing paths quite a bit. Once the boat ferried us across Gordon River, the door dropped with a splash, and we were greeted with our first impression of the West Coast Trail. A 50-foot wooden ladder leading straight up into the forest from the beach. Over the next week, we'd see hundreds of ladders just like this throughout the trail. We started our hike up from the beach and quickly realized why some folks consider this to be the hardest portion of the trail. A rough, steep trail wound through the forest, leading up to an elevation of around 700 feet at the highest point from the start. Almost all of the other hikers, including Vroni, passed Joel and I fairly quickly and headed onwards. To be fair, I was really the one that struggled with this section, and for a while was worried I was going to strain my knee. Mentally, I'd prepped myself that my pack was going to be the heaviest on the first day, but feeling it along this stretch really put things into perspective. We stopped for lunch at a derelict steam donkey, a machine used by lumberjacks, and laid out for a rest. After rallying, I hiked onwards, eventually getting to the sharp descent down to Thrasher Cove, our destination for the first night. Thankfully, Joel had hiked ahead to set up our camp. There at Thrasher Cove, I took a dip in the surf and relaxed. It was a beautiful hot day that made me thankful we were under the tree cover for the first leg of the hike. I also cut my foot in the surf, but that's not too important. Also at Thrasher Cove, we met the first group of hikers heading the other way. A group of 5 who were spending their last night at Thrasher before hiking out the following day. They made a giant fire and invited everyone else to join them and relax, which we happily took them up on. This was our first real experience with meeting people along the trail itself, and I think the warm invitation of how this group approached hiking the trail really left an impression on Joel and I. To be honest, over the next several days, we kind of took it upon ourselves to do the same thing. Make a nice campfire, invite other hikers to join and relax by the fire, and then just share stories of the trail as the sun set and hang out. In this group of 5, I met a nice fellow named Robin. Remember that giant Cubano sandwich I picked up at the cafe at the beginning of the day? I still had half of it, and traded it to Robin for some chocolate. He happily wolfed it down as another member of his group, Gary, hilariously, but perhaps unadvisedly, burned what provisions he didn't want to hike out the next day. We hung out for a long time until the sunset and enjoyed a great night for stargazing before turning in for the night. My first day on the West Coast Trail was filled with amazing sights, exhaustion, meeting new friends, and a couple of setbacks. Struggling on the first leg of the trail, and then also cutting my foot in the surf when I had a pair of aqua socks in my pack, those were the kinds of mistakes that could compound and really blemish a hike. I needed to tighten it up for day 2. The second day on the trail was probably the prettiest weather-wise. It also presented a choice in trail, some welcome changes in terrain, and some new challenges in the form of the tides. In terms of choice, we had 2 options. We could either ascend back up the overland trail and spend the day hiking in the woods, or take the bouldering route along the beach as long as the tides permitted it. Since waiting for the tide to recede would only mean a small delay for starting the hike that day, we opted for the coastal route. We were here to hike near the water after all, and the day was simply just gorgeous. In waiting for the tides, we also got to know the 3 folks from Calgary who were part of our Gordon Ferry cohort, as they were also keeping an eye on the receding tide and when the passage would be open. They were all into photography and were really looking forward to taking pictures of the Sandstone Shelf and Owen Point, 2 of the places we'd be passing on our way to Camper Bay, where they were also planning on spending the night. Also at this point, Vroni was totally on board, and we were a party of 3. Once the way was open, we hit the trail, mentioning to our Calgary friends that we'd see them at Camper Bay. The route was probably the slowest going over the course of the whole hike, but it was also some of the most beautiful and enjoyable terrain to traverse. This stretch had lots of large boulders, logs, and a lovely breeze. We all really enjoyed hiking this stretch and had our fun trying to solve the puzzle of the best route to take.
You want to give a thumbs up to the people back home? There it is. Woo!
After a few kilometers, we came to Owen Point. The terrain here was really unique, and we passed through a sea cave and over a stone shelf in order to move ahead. Past the point, we came to a portion of the hike that's as dangerous as it is beautiful. Joel described the Sandstone Shelf as feeling otherworldly, almost alien, and he was totally right. Throughout this long, flat sandstone shelf, there were these surge channels cutting straight from the tree line to the water. The orientation the prior day had been very clear. Don't jump over these, as it could lead to death. And it was evident. To fall into one of these channels would be a terrible situation. We took our time hiking around these channels, and even toppled a log into one of them that someone had precariously laid across one. It honestly looked like an accident waiting to happen. As we hiked off the beach at the second access point, the weather turned a bit chilly and foggy. We had a decent hike up until that point, but needed to make up some ground. We blazed along the trail, made good time, and even ran into a stretch of the boardwalk that was simply destroyed. During this last stretch of trail before making it to Camper Bay, we also got to know Vroni better, and vice versa. I tried brushing up on my German that I'd learned in college, and had largely forgotten. She was happy to help me remember words as I stumbled through broken Deutsch, and she was also curious about how Joel and I had met, what we did for hobbies, and then she also asked about our wives. During this stretch, she also dubbed her trusty walking stick as Harold. She claimed he was her boyfriend and he was dependable and supported her. After some ladders down towards the beach, and as the dusk was settling in, we reached our last obstacle before Camper Bay, the first cable car of the trip. In planning for the trail, we'd learned that there'd be these cable cars, and we were really looking forward to trying them out. A backpacking trip with hand-operated cable cars just added a level of novelty that we hadn't encountered on the Washington coast. The first one was interesting, but honestly, maybe it didn't live up to the hype. And by the end of the trip, we saw these cable cars as an annoying necessity, though they were still very convenient to have. It also didn't help that the first cable car was slowed since one of our packs was leaned against the ropes. But, After making it to Camper Bay, we set up our tents and realized we were the only folks at the site that night. With the clammy weather, we quickly made a fire, filtered water, and had dinner. Vroni was particularly worried about the potential for bears or wolves, but we assured her we'd be fine. The real concern, as the night got darker, was that we'd heard nothing about the Calgary folks since Thrasher Cove. Something might have happened that would cause them to stop early, but the problem was that there were little to no campsites between Thrasher Cove and Camper Bay. We decided to stay up for a bit in case they needed help. Around 11 or so, we heard the cable car operating, and indeed, it was our friends from Calgary. One of them had had a spill on the rocks, and that, along with getting some stunning photos of the sandstone shelf, had meant some sizable delays to their hike. They were worn out, but had gritted it out and made it. They were happy to join us around the fire to rest and warm up, and quickly turned in after setting up camp. We were really glad they were able to reach Camper Bay safely, and it was a nice fairy cohort bonding moment. The third day of the trip was, in my opinion, the most difficult. We woke up at Camper Bay to a clammy, foggy morning. The folks from Calgary were packing up camp and had the same destination as us for the day, Walbrand Creek. The trail started with a steep incline up from the water into the woods. The next several kilometers were a lot of what we'd ended the previous day with. Some ladders here and there, but we were happy to be immersed in such a beautiful place.
Machen Sie Rex, bitte.
WHEEK. Yeah, that's the term. Yeah.
Before long, we came to a cool creek that had some circular pools carved into it, and we spent some time just marveling at it from the bridge above. One hiking tip for the West Coast Trail that I can share here is that you should definitely take some time to just stop and admire the scenery. There's loads of untamed nature here that can be really easy to miss if you're only looking at the trail. As we approached a steep descent into Cullite Creek, we ran into a group of high schoolers and their chaperones who were hiking the trail as part of a school program. They were really nice, and we got a moment to introduce ourselves as we waited for people to complete the 11-ladder gauntlet down to Cullite. Finally, exhausted and on the rocky banks of the creek, everyone stopped for lunch. We gladly rested, ate, and took a long lunch. After crossing the creek on a cable car, we were met with an ascent up into the canopy that matched our descent. Ladders as far as the eye could see. Huffing and puffing, rung by rung, we made it up. While it was still overcast, at least the fog had burned off. This section of trail featured a nice boardwalk through forest clearings and more ladders. For some of the challenging, muddy sections that we didn't record through here, it's worth giving a shout out to Harold, who didn't just help Vroni avoid the mud, but he helped me avoid the mud as well. Also, during this muddy section of the trail, one of Joel's trekking poles was unfortunately lost in the line of service. After turning a corner, we were met with one of the most picturesque sections of the entire hike, Logan Creek. A deep valley dropped down at an angle to a lovely little creek, maybe 100 feet below. To our left, we had a great view of the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and the only way to cross it all was a single long suspension bridge, a new addition and improvement to the trail. It's hard to describe how awesome it was to see this bridge and cross it. I felt like I was living through that scene in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Also, before there was a nice suspension bridge here, apparently there was just a steep network of ladders down to a tiny bridge crossing, then a huge network of ladders up the other side. I was very thankful that this bridge was put in place not just for the cinematic moment, but also by this point in the day, my dogs were barking. The last 3 kilometers to Walbrand Creek, we don't really have any footage of, because it was hard going and we were tired. It was starting to get a bit dark, the trail was rough, and our tanks were running low. We made it to Walbrand, and after some searching, we were able to find a campsite. It was fairly crowded since the high school group was staying there, and they'd claimed all the primo spots. They were cool, but unfortunately, this was a theme that played out for basically the rest of the trip. Our Calgary friends arrived not much later, and together we shared a campsite on the banks of Walbrand Creek and ate dinner and chatted. I took some time to work on my swing with a stick and rocks.
Oh, sorry, I thought it was going. I panned out to the outfield and.
Oh no!
Eventually the tide rose and swallowed our fire, and we turned in for the night.
Okay.
We started the day with a very long cable car across Walbrand Creek. It was foggy out, and the cable car really tested our arm endurance, but we were in high spirits and happy to be hiking. A small waterfall caught our eye, and there were some ladders, but not too many here. After the short section in the woods, the trail dropped down onto the beach, and we got to walk along the surf. Not before long, the sun finally returned in earnest and burned off the fog. The day heated up, and we slogged through the coarse sand, but also got to enjoy some really pretty sea stacks and tide pools. Joel managed to get some nice footage of Bonilla Creek, while Vroni and I opted to rest and stay on the beach. In looking at this campsite, it'll definitely have to be a rest spot for the night on a future trip, as it's really pretty. Then came the next big crossing, at Carmona Creek. This spot was also very pretty, and this time the cable car really flew once we left the platform. On the other side, we stopped and rested for lunch. It felt great to be making good time on the trail, but also to have time to just chill for a bit to enjoy the scenery. Around the corner, we also saw the Carmona Lighthouse peeking through the fog and got some awesome pictures and footage. With the sun burning off the fog, it made for a very striking scene, especially since we hadn't really had other signs of civilization recently. We were so focused on the lighthouse, though, we didn't even realize we'd passed Chez Monique's Burger Shack, one of the popular stops for backpackers. We took some time to enjoy the lighthouse and the view, signed the guest book, also said hi to one of the lighthouse keepers who was mowing the lawn. After that, we descended down to the beach and made our way through the rocks all the way to Cribbs Creek. We were tired, but not as pooped as when we had gotten to Walbrand. Once at Cribbs, we made a camp and built a nice large fire. We invited anyone who was interested to join us, and a whole bunch of different campers took us up on our offer. It was really unique and interesting just getting to meet a whole bunch of different people and hear about their journeys thus far, where they were from, and why they decided to hike the trail. This night really just felt like an outdoor enthusiast convention in the best way possible. If you end up hiking the trail, seriously, it's worth it to make a campfire and invite other folks to join you. One by one, folks turned in for the night and left the fire until Joel and I were the only ones on the beach. We joked and chatted as the fire died down, hearing the waves crash against the rock barrier out in the dark. At one point, we thought a bunch of other hikers approaching the campsite were lost and needed some help, at least based on their headlamps from far away, but it turned out to be a couple of people looking for a good place to hide their food. We finally turned in as well. We started the day nursing our various injuries. I had a nasty sunburn from the day before, from getting too eager to shed my outer layer in favor of a tank top. Vroni had some bad blisters, and then Joel had a rough scrape from an earlier rock section along the beach. We didn't take too long getting ready at the site though, as this was going to be one of our longest days by distance, and probably our longest in terms of time. We said goodbye to all the friends we had made the night before and set off towards Susiat Falls. The way was nice and not too rough. While we could opt to hike on the shoreline, it was fairly rocky and we mostly ended up sticking to the overland trail. After climbing up a steep set of ladders from the beach, we also spotted a whale from far away as it breached and spouted in the air. That was cool.
Yeah, we climbed the ladder, we get to see a whale. Ah. There he is! Intended usage.
From there, the trail was breezy until we made it to our clear stopping place for lunch, the Crab Shack. Located at the mouth of Nidinot Lake, the Crab Shack was a cool oasis in the middle of the hike run by a First Nations family.
Nice.
It featured a river crossing by boat taxi, a potential entrance or exit to the hike, and a small crab shack with hot food and a store. There was also a friendly family dog who welcomed us to sit and take a rest. We gladly shed our packs and spent over an hour here eating, having caught up to the high schoolers as they finished up their meals. A few of them asked us how the NHL playoffs were going since they weren't allowed to have their phones. They were excited to hear we were from Seattle and mentioned that if their team, the Edmonton Oilers, got eliminated, they wanted the Kraken to go all the way. After they departed, we got some food. I had a fresh cutlet of halibut, a baked potato, and a can of Coke, while Joel and Vroni each got a baked potato. Some of the kind people that ran the Crab Shack shared stories of hikers, wildlife, and big catches they'd made over the years. Before I went back for a second can of Coke, they graciously allowed me to film them preparing crab in the traditional way for another customer. It was very cool getting to meet these First Nations folks in their ancestral home, and I really appreciated the whole experience. But eventually, with full bellies, we put our packs in the taxi, were ferried to the other side of the river mouth, and continued on with our hike. The next stretch of trail between the Crab Shack and Susiat Falls was maybe my personal favorite part of the hike. We zigzagged along the hillsides overlooking the shoreline as the waves crashed below us. The small, rocky coves were beautiful in the fog, and hearing the rhythmic clacking of the stones in the surf helped set a nice hiking cadence. At one point, we got to see a hole-in-the-wall sort of rock on a point. Man, this whole section really reminded me of Washington. Finally, as the evening set upon us, we pulled into Susiat Falls, totally exhausted. The entire campsite was packed with other hikers. We found a spot on the beach behind a log, built a fire, and ate dinner. We kicked back and relaxed after a hard-hiked day. And finally, we turned in. We woke up and started our day a bit late, with the sun already high in the sky. Most of the other hikers at Susiat Falls had already packed up and left, but we were happy to give ourselves a bit more time to take footage of the beautiful falls and have breakfast before immediately ascending up a large flight of ladders to get off the beach. As we crossed over the top of the falls, we were able to get a pretty amazing view of the Pacific Ocean. We hiked on for a bit and quickly ended up at one of the larger river crossings of the whole hike, over Klanawa River. We took turns using the cable cars and were fortunate enough to cross paths with our friends from Calgary, who helped us get across the river, and took some footage as well.
Welcome.
The next stretch of the hike was also just pleasant and awesome. The sun was out, and most of the time we were high up on the bluffs, looking down on the waves and rocks below. We crossed some small sections of beach and also saw an old anchor from a shipwreck and a steam donkey. Then we found something truly unexpected. Two nice red outdoor chairs perched on the edge of one of the cliffs, overlooking a striking view of the ocean and the coastline. We couldn't help but take a long rest, sit, and chat. And I think for all of us, or maybe just me, this was really the moment that it set in that our trip was nearing its end. In roughly one full day, we'd be reaching the end of the trail and would be heading back to civilization, with all its comforts and responsibilities, and, at least for a time, have to leave the rugged, beautiful West Coast Trail behind. On one hand, the idea of a hot meal and a shower seemed so appealing, but at the same time, I felt like a kid on a roller coaster as it made its last turn coming into the station. We got back on the trail and made our way past another beautiful waterfall, Toccoas Falls. And after that, we were quickly back down and hiking on the beach. In short order, we made it to Michigan Creek, where we set up camp for the night. We spent a decent amount of time just resting on the beach and enjoying the sun. Several hundred feet out in the water, humpbacks continually popped up and breached. It was cool to see, and I unfortunately didn't have my camera on me. There's another tip for the West Coast Trail. If you want to make sure to catch all the footage of things worth seeing, make sure to have your camera on you at all times. As the sun set, we started looking for firewood, but instead, a few other folks invited us to join them around their campfire, which was nice. Quickly, we realized that the two guys who had invited us to join were Will and John, two of the people who were on the boat with us at the very start of the trail. We caught up on highlights from the trip, wildlife sightings, and what the experience had been like overall. We also basically emptied our packs of food since we'd overestimated how much we needed to eat, and might as well eat the food there instead of packing it out. Jerky, snacks, sweets, and safety were passed around and devoured communally as the dark set in and the fire crackled. John consumed an entire one of our Tony's Chocolonely bars, totally surprised that we would let him eat it all. From time to time, Will would ask, "Hey John, let's put on something new. Maybe some bebop or jazz?" John would nod, and Will, with a big smile on his face, would toss another log on the fire. We hung out fairly late, then retired to our tents for the last night on the trail. The last day we woke up kinda groggy, but got things going. It had sprinkled overnight and the mist had set in, so it was fairly soggy and cold that morning. We found our Calgary friends and got a photo of the group, then quickly packed up and hit the trail. In short order, the beach was behind us and we were winding through the forest where we found the Pachina Lighthouse. We explored around a bit, signed a guest book along the trail, and even found a silly sign with directions pointing to countries around the world.
Yeah! There's Germany? There you go. So just start walking that way. Deutschland?
Vroni was stoked that Germany was listed, just a short 8,000 kilometers away. The rest of the trail was fairly uneventful. The trail wound through the woods where there were small ladders and stairs. Hello. Waddle waddle.
I was about to say, you look like a toddler. Like
feel
being
like
very definitive with
We
each.
saw an old motorcycle that had been reclaimed by nature, but that was about it. Within a few hours, we were on the beach of Pachina Bay and at the end of our hike. By this point, the sun had burned through the fog, so the day warmed up. We went to the small ranger station near the parking lot and checked out off the trail. Each of us purchased a few souvenirs, then we all piled into my Forester and drove to the nearby town of Bamfield, where we all got a hot meal and snacks. There we ran into John and Will again and caught up with both of them before heading back to Pachina Bay. And there, in the sun, at the end of our hike, we sat on the beach and rested. Joel and I eating snacks and drinking Gatorade. Vroni indulging herself with a cigarette. We had hiked the entire West Coast Trail, and our endeavor was at its end. We had started with full packs and unknown anticipation, and it ended with sore muscles, sunburns, and totally subverted expectations. And by subverted expectations, what I really mean is the West Coast Trail ended up being a really social experience in a way that Joel and I weren't anticipating. We had prepared for 7 days, the two of us, in nature. And we'd packed a radio to listen to Mariners baseball games, we packed a bunch of 2-player card games, our e-readers, and to be honest, I don't think any of those things got touched over the course of the whole trail, and were really just dead weight in our packs. We spent all of our free time at campsites, sitting around campfires, on a log, just meeting new people. Whether it was people from our ferry cohort, or people hiking the opposite direction that we only shared one night at a campsite with. It was just, hey, where are you from? What was the coolest thing you saw today? Why are you hiking the trail? That element of the West Coast Trail, I think, was something neither Joel or I had expected at all, and was just really cool. There at Pachina Bay, Joel and I were on the cusp of having to say goodbye to a great friend. Someone who we'd shared the trail and journeyed with for a week, who we'd only just met. And while we hadn't even known each other 8 days before, it felt like we were saying goodbye to an old friend. The West Coast shuttle came, we each gave Vroni a big hug, and then she, and Harold the Stick, were gone. We climbed into the Forester and started the long journey back to Seattle, driving to Victoria, getting dinner, the ferry to Tsawwassen, and then the rest of the drive back. Late at night, we pulled into Seattle, and the trip was over. We were back in real life. So, overall, as I'm sure you're aware, the West Coast Trail really was a once-in-a-lifetime sort of adventure for me. I know it was for Joel too. We met so many people, saw some amazing sights, and honestly learned some about ourselves and what we're really capable of overcoming. It left a deep appreciation for the culture and heritage of the folks who had been there longer than any of us. The entire experience was unforgettable, and if you ever have the desire or opportunity, I really encourage you to seize the moment, grab your pack, and explore nature on a journey such as this.
Intended usage.
But also, when I say once in a lifetime, I also don't want to rule out going back.
Chug, chug.
Oh, that's personal. Deeply personal. Never.
If we ever cross paths on the trail, make sure to say hi. Thank you so much for watching.